Hello, welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Bill Dwyer, and I'm joined today by Dan O'Connor. Dan is a nominee for Outstanding Thesis Award. Dan, your thesis is entitled The Effects of Obesity on National and Homeland Security. Can you tell us a little about your paper?
I'd love to. My premise was that 75% of all 18 to 24-year-olds have been deemed unfit or overfat by a variety of medical dispositions, with 100 million Americans being deemed obese and another 100 million Americans being deemed overweight. From a recruiting standpoint, from an emergency management and response standpoint, and also from an economic standpoint, the chronic effects of obesity on America's infrastructure, national homeland security are in crisis.
It's a fascinating topic, Dan. How did you come upon this?
Well, as a former Marine, I had several subordinates who were in the recruiting field, and they were starting to tell me that they saw a trend where they were not able to start meeting recruiting numbers. And also with other compadres, constituents in the law enforcement and first responder field, they were also having the same effect. So as I started to move through this program, I determined that from a chronic point of view, we spend a great deal of time and money on acute response, emergencies, terrorism, things that have rapid impact. The inverse was perhaps being avoided, that the chronic effects of obesity on first responder care, recruitment, and also the economic impacts vis-a-vis the money spent on chronic care, chronic health, and all these things, while avoidable, were becoming a burden that we could no longer pay.
Dan, what was your methodology?
My methodology was a policy analysis, and I combined that policy analysis with the unintended consequences of technology. For example, I started my premise with, we had no idea that the introduction of fertilizers and chemical enhancements to agriculture would lead to the Green Revolution. We had no idea that the Green Revolution would lead to the Department of Agriculture changing the methodology of small local farms becoming large industrial agriculture. We had no idea or disposition that these large mega farms would then have a surplus of product, and that surplus of product had to be utilized because we have a capitalist business structure that requires, by fiduciary responsibility, to make money. So each separate or disparate activity had an unintended consequence, and that unintended consequence moved forward because of policies made in the United States to create a food surplus system that may in fact be the primary cause for the obesity epidemic being exacerbated over a 25-year to 30-year, one generation period of time. In the late 70s, our nation was approximately 13 to 14% obese. Today it's 38%. That's graphic.
So Dan, the bottom line here is that we have a significant number of potential men and women who could serve, who can't serve because they're too obese?
That's correct, Bill. The largest population of the Department of Defense, 90%, is 18 to 24-year-olds. That same demographic also is the introduction of most people into the law enforcement, fire, and first responder fields. We could certainly change the requirement and have a higher obesity rate, change the percentages, just modify the numbers, but that doesn't address the cause, where we have people that over a generation have become so fat, and it's not a disparaging comment, but their obesity number is so high that they have diseases that never occurred in people prior. So in our current age groups, we have 6-month-olds that are obese. We have 12-year-old children that are obese. We've had 1,000% spike in type 2 diabetes. All of these things limit people's participation because of the physical requirements, because of the cognitive requirements. We are impacting our national and homeland security capabilities long term because we're not addressing this issue now.
So Dan, as I see it, there are two problems here. One is the number of potential eligible first responders and members of our military potentially are not qualified because of obesity. and then the effect of the additional costs on our healthcare system of treating those very diseases of which you spoke.
Bill, you're right on both accounts. The first account is a very, very small amount of Americans actually serve in the all-volunteer force. Currently, 1/3 of 1% of American citizens serve in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, National Guard, and Reserves. It's a very small number. The all-volunteer force was designed to elevate professionalism, elevate education standards. So we start lopping away at the top 5–10% of the population and the lower 15% of the population for a variety of degrees. It's just the way the demographic plays out. So a smaller and smaller percentage of American males and females serve in the active duty and reserve components of the Department of Defense. When you start eliminating that group of citizenry through a variety of issues, cognitive performance on tests, obesity, all things are affected by diet and exercise, the obesity paradigm. So the cognitive effects and performance requirements are also affected by obesity. So the number is ever shrinking. One alternative to that ever shrinking number would be to go backwards in time to a 1970s protocol and have a conscription or draft. I don't think America will ever do that. To your other question, the current estimated costs by a study by McKinsey and Group have obesity costing the United States for its direct and indirect costs being in excess of $500 billion. So annually, we spend $500 billion on the effects of obesity. I don't know how spending that kind of money on a disease that by and large could be deemed preventable in most cases, how that is not a homeland and national security issue.
Dan, you said your thesis was a policy analysis. Do you also propose a potential solution to this problem?
I do, and the solution is radical, perhaps. It's also a little gutsy, and it goes against what would be deemed the conventional wisdom of weight control. The conventional wisdom of weight control is it is a simple problem. We need to exercise more and eat less. But the data suggests that we exercise more now than ever before, and we actually eat less than the projected numbers state we do. For example, if you follow one course of action, it says that we eat on average 500 calories more a day than 35 years ago. If it was an energy in and out balance question, we would all then necessarily be on average about 1,300 pounds. So clearly, it is not as simple as a calories in, calories out expenditure problem. We exercise more now than ever before. Multiple studies have indicated that our children have the same output and same energy expenditure levels that we did 35 and 40 years ago. So that disposition that we need to exercise more and eat less doesn't stand up to academic scrutiny. However, the disposition, that argument that we need to just exercise more and eat less, is a manufactured disposition from those industries that benefit greatly from we eating more refined foods, more refined carbohydrates and sugar, the food industry. So if we were serious and wanted to address this thing head on, we would look at the policy analysis of what the effect of the Farm Bill has on agriculture. What does the effect of agriculture have on our agricultural policies have on the United States having the largest consumption of soda in the world, the largest consumption of refined foods in the world, and the largest consumption of sugar in the world. Currently, our caloric consumption is relatively equal to South Korea, Austria, and France. The difference is they have obesity rates under 12%, 5% to 12% respectively. If we maintain the same caloric intake, and again, if it's an energy balance issue, we should have the same relative obesity rates. But we don't. We have a 34 to 38% obesity rate. We eat a diet that is the largest in the world of refined carbohydrates, refined foods, refined fats, and sugar. Those other nations don't. So we have a very clear picture of our food system and the foods we eat as Americans being vastly different than other nations in the world. And we have models that could demonstrate if we changed what we ate, we might not necessarily have the same obesity rates climbing that we've seen in the last 35 years.
So would you propose a whole foods diet on base through the commissary and the exchange?
I think that would be a start. I think it's bigger than that, though. I think we have to have a cultural paradigm shift. We have to move past the fact that, unfortunately, we have a system of government that allows some degree of influence. We have a lobbying effort, and we have an economic machine that generates $4 to $6 trillion annually that has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and the nation as an economic engine to create revenue. All of those things play into the fact that we eat the most amount of sugar and refined foods and the least amount of nutritious food in the world. So if we were to perhaps even entertain the idea that we have to change our food system, go to a maybe more smaller distributed food system, kind of go back in time somewhat and start to eat food as opposed to food and food-like products, and understand that the methodology of nutritionism, breaking down food to its smallest particles and redistributing those and putting them back together in a food product and a food stuff. It's not food anymore. It's no longer a cucumber. It's no longer a stalk of corn or wheat. It's been refined and all the nutritional value has been damaged or destroyed in the process. And we support that by legislating the Farm Bill and other avenues of mechanized food production so we can have a more convenient, quick, but less nutritious food stuff that we currently combine into our bodies.
Fascinating information, Dan. Thanks so much. I think you've taken this topic and applied it in a very interesting way to the Homeland Security construct. Congratulations again on your nomination at Outstanding Thesis.
Thank you, Bill.